Well, welcome to Christ in Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I've seen on the internet lately. And it's a question that I think every homeowner and every Christian that owns property certainly should think about this. And even someone who lives in a city in the midst of a bustling metropolis, or any place actually in the modern world, should a Christian own a gun? Or more specifically, should a Christian carry a gun? That's more of a significant thing than even owning a gun, because there are a lot of Christians who own a gun. They have a rifle or a shotgun or a handgun somewhere in the home. Maybe they've inherited it from a grandfather or grandmother or relative or father or mother, and so they have a gun. But then the question is, should a Christian carry a gun? And that's even elevating the situation even further. Should they carry a gun on their person at all times or whenever they leave the front door? So these are questions that Christians need to ask. And the reason we need to ask them is because from time to time we'll run into Christians who say, oh, it's not appropriate for a Christian to own a gun or carry a gun or ever get in a situation where they would want to use a gun. And of course, there are Christian pacifists. Not a very high percentage of people who call themselves Christians are pacifists, but there are some. And then I think most Christians are sort of in between and saying, well, I don't have anything against, in principle, owning or carrying a gun. I just don't think I would ever do it personally myself because I don't like guns, or I don't know anything about guns, and I would feel very awkward even having a gun. Don't know what I would do with it, even if I had to use it or there was a situation where I could use it. I don't even know if I would be able to fire it. I haven't had any training, don't know anything about it. There are a lot of Christians on all kinds of different sides, some who never own any guns. And then there are Christians who are gun enthusiasts who own a number of guns, shotguns and rifles and handguns, and actually use them as hobbies and are at the gun ranges and do target practicing and all kinds of recreational hunting, deer hunting. I know in Michigan, where I grew up, a lot of people are deer hunters, and they'll go up northern Michigan, and even up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and they'll make a big weekend or week of it, going with their friends and family members up there to hunt deer. And then there are all kinds of other recreational guns used to shoot rabbits and all kinds of animals, different seasons of the year. You have to get a license for that, and so on and so forth. It was quite common growing up to see pheasant hunters in the fields. You could drive through the country and you'd see pheasant hunters with their shotguns hunting for pheasants. And all kinds of deer hunters, you would see them walking through cornfields and so on and so forth, looking for deer. And myself, I have grown up around shotguns, so we actually at one point had a skeet shooter where we would send up these clay pigeons and shoot at them. And I've shot a number of times at clay pigeons, and it was kind of a fun hobby to go out there and have someone use the handheld machine, and they'd show up and throw these clay pigeons in the air, and then you try to shoot them, simulating a real live pigeon. I've never gone deer hunting or any larger game hunting, but a lot of people in my family have gone deer hunting and rabbit hunting and all kinds of different hunting. So I grew up around guns, but I've never really spent much time or energy or money even investing in hunting or purchasing firearms and so forth. But what people are beginning to ask is, if you live in a city, if you live in an area where crime is known, is it okay to have a gun? And is it okay to use a gun if you were to find yourself in a situation where there's a break-in and a criminal is breaking into your home trying to steal something? Should a Christian have a gun in those cases to defend himself or even just protect property? So, and I've also noticed on the internet that there's quite a wide range of videos done on gun ownership. For example, here is Kirk Cameron, and he's asking the question, what does the Bible say about owning and using guns? Does the Bible really say about self-defense, protecting your family? So he's covering that topic. Here's another Christian podcaster, Alan Parr. Should Christians own and advocate for the right to carry guns? Further on down, you get all kinds of smaller podcasts addressing this issue. Should a Christian carry a gun? So that's the more severe form of owning a gun, actually carrying a gun. Here's one, should Christians own and use guns? Here's a woman who is holding a sidearm, and she's asking the question, should Christians own and carry guns? And so obviously it looks like she is advocating for Christians not only to own guns, but to carry guns. And here is popular podcaster Allie Beth Stuckey. This was done 5 years ago. Should Christians own guns? And here's another one. Should Christians carry guns? What does the Bible say? And so on and so forth. So you have all of these. Here's Todd Friel, guns, self-defense, and Christians. So you have all of these Christians addressing the issue. And I just wanted to talk about it to help not only myself. I have thought from time to time that it might be helpful, important, or necessary for myself to own a gun in case of some kind of break-in. I don't necessarily haven't even considered actually carrying a gun and getting a license to carry because I don't feel the need is necessary. So I'll get into that. And I just want to go through some of the reasons why a person might want to carry a gun. I think a lot of people, if you were to go back into time and think, say, about 100 years ago at least, and people in the wilderness, especially if you go back 200 years ago in the colonial times and about the time of the founding of the United States, if you raise this question, people would look at you like you're from another planet, because obviously in a wilderness situation, almost every colonist had a gun, a weapon, something that they could use to hunt game. There were no grocery stores as we know them now, and there were no restaurants as we know them now. So if you wanted meat, you'd have to go out and hunt the meat and kill the meat and cook the meat and process it. And you needed a firearm to do that. So you're not going to go, as the primitive people, hunter-gathering society, you wouldn't go out with a clan and just try to wear down the deer and just outrun it, and then when it dropped from exhaustion, grab it and kill it. No, you needed a gun. You needed a firearm. And so they would go out into the woods and shoot turkeys and deer, and that's how they got their meat. So the question of should a Christian own a gun, for colonial Americans, it's laughable. They would say, well, of course you own a gun. And there would be nothing in principle against owning a gun. The same way, I think, in even ancient times, biblical times, certainly the Old Testament, they didn't have guns per se. And the New Testament, there were no guns. That's an invention that developed And so, but the question would be, well, should I own a sword? Should I own a weapon of any kind for emergencies? And of course, we have in the New Testament the reference that Jesus actually tells his disciples to buy a sword. And it's something that it wasn't even a moral question. It was more like it's a practical question of, do I need a sword? Do I need a weapon of some kind? It would be there available for wild animals. It would be there available for self-defense. It's just something that wouldn't even be on the radar of a question in the ancient world. And not until mostly modern times today would the question even arise, would there be anything wrong with owning a gun or having a weapon in the home? The only people that would ever question it would be the pacifists, like your Quakers, say in the colonial times, because of their commitment to nonviolent and pacifism. And I've done another video in the past on pacifism and showed how in the Bible that is not a position that can be sustained from certainly the Old Testament and not even the New Testament. We don't have time to get into all of the reasons why pacifism does not make sense, but it's simply that when Jesus is talking about turn the other cheek, he's talking about a situation, personal offenses, and he's not talking about governments and defending territories. He's not talking about leaders, say like a president and senators and Congress people. He's not talking about they have to not be willing to use force because it violates the teachings of Jesus. No, he's talking about personal interactions and saying don't take violence to the level in your personal interactions, and try to live a peaceful life. And it is possible for a normal person to go through life without violence. I know that I've lived into my adulthood, and I have never had to use violence against another person. Thank God. I pray that I don't ever have to all my life. I've never had to fire a gun. I've never even needed a gun in any of my housing situations. I've lived in apartments. I've lived in homes. I've lived in cities. I've lived in the country. I've lived in all kinds of different situations. I've lived in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, my first pastoring position, in a very high crime area. Never had to own a gun. I've only encountered violence one time walking out the front door of the church and talking with someone, and all of a sudden a group of young men saw this person I was talking to and began to argue and began to try to strike him. And actually somebody threw a punch at me, and I held up my briefcase and I hit the briefcase, and then I just walked away, and me and this other person, we walked away. So we avoided that situation, but that's about it. That's about the only violence I've ever encountered. And I have personally never taken a swing at anybody, or, of course, never had to even think about using a gun. But the question is there anything wrong with owning a gun? And I'd like to raise that question and answer it, but let me first go over some of the reasons why someone might want to own a gun. What are some of the reasons why people might want to own a gun? Just in case some criminal tries to break in your home, it's there for you to fire, not necessarily at them, but to fire it or to shout and warn the person and tell them, I have a gun, I will use it, and scare them off, because criminals make a calculation before they hit your home. It's whether you will be an easy means to possession of items that are not theirs, where they can steal from you easily, or go on to the next home where somebody doesn't have a gun. They will calculate, and if you have a gun, they probably will turn around. So just in case somebody tries to come after you or come after your possessions, you have something that can scare them off. So the gun, owning the gun in the home would be just in case you need it. And hopefully you would never, ever have to use it, and it would just sit there and gather dust. You wouldn't ever have to fire it. You would never have to warn anyone that you've got a gun or that you would fire it. So it's just there as a backup insurance, you might say. So, a lot of people who say, I would never use a gun, they do have something in their home that they could use in self-defense. Some people have a baseball bat in their room, or some people might have some kind of hatchet or an axe or some kind of a weapon like they used in the ancient world, some kind of knife for protection. And so they're not just sitting ducks. So a lot of people already have weapons. They already have instruments of self-defense, even though they don't necessarily have guns. But it's something to consider that could probably scare the criminal off a lot more than just threatening them with a knife. I have a knife, That doesn't seem to be as powerful as I have a gun. Now, they don't know how big your gun is. They don't know if you have a handgun, a .22, a small .22. They don't know if you have a .38. They don't know if you have a .45. They don't know if you have a larger rifle or a shotgun. A lot of farmers in the country, in country living, probably every farmhouse has a shotgun somewhere on the domicile, and they use it if they need it, and hopefully they never have to need it. And so there are all kinds of reasons. It's more of a practical wisdom question, I think, than a actual moral question. The moral question would be, would I be willing to kill someone? Now, people who own guns, they don't think of it as, would I own a gun because I want to shoot someone and kill them? No, it's more like, can I own a gun and chase someone off who might attack my family or attack me or try to invade my home? And can I chase them off, scare them off? Do I have something that I can fire that would interrupt their intentions, their evil intentions? And so the question is not, am I willing to kill someone with the gun? But that is a consideration. What if they don't get scared off? And what if you are at the point where you have to decide, am I going to shoot this person or not? And then it gets down to, a lot of people will say, well, you don't have to shoot them in the chest, or you don't have to shoot them in the heart, or shoot them in the head. You can shoot them in the leg, or shoot them in the arm, or shoot them in the rear end, and just scare them off. Well, the problem with that logic is that it's hard to actually aim the gun or the rifle and hit a very specific spot unless you're really good, unless you really practice, unless you're a good aim and you're a good shot. And the police, they go to the shooting range every week, if I'm not mistaken, and are constantly improving their aim. And they do that all the time. And even they are not sure shots, and they don't practice the idea of, well, just shoot him in the leg or shoot him in the rear end. Don't shoot him. No, when you're under fire, when someone's shooting at you, You usually are shooting at center mass, which is the biggest and easiest target to hit someone with these little tiny bullets. And so you're shooting them in the midsection, the chest, the stomach. You're trying to shoot them in the area of the human body that is most easily shot at. And to try to shoot at someone's leg it takes a very good shot to just shoot at the leg or shoot an arm or shoot at the rear end and not hit something else. So you have to be quite a good shot to do that. And so most people aren't, and so they're going to be shooting center mass, which is the easiest place to hit someone. But hopefully it doesn't ever get to that spot. Now, here are the reasons that might be listed as to not owning a firearm. And there are plenty of reasons why you might not want to own a firearm. And let's talk about those. If you don't think you'd ever need it. So if you're not in a really high crime area, or if there aren't a lot of break-ins in your area, if you don't live in a city or high population, you might just list all the reasons for and against and conclude, I just don't need this. I've lived in this home for 40 years and I have never had a reason to own a firearm. I've never felt unsafe without owning a gun. And it's just not something that I really practically need. As opposed to, say, an area where there is crime and you read about it in the papers and it's not very far from you and people's homes are getting broken in, or if there's a rash of break-ins in the area, or if there are some new changes in your community where you think, well, maybe I might need a gun. Even if I don't ever use it, it'd be nice to have it. I know my grandmother, when she lived alone in her senior years, she bought a little .22 revolver and kept it in her room. And she never had to fire it, and thank God, and never had to use it to defend herself. But she had it there, and it was something that gave her peace of mind, so that if she was invaded and attacked, she could have a fighting chance. Now, some people say, well, I don't need a gun, I just pray. And okay, but then I would ask the question, do you have insurance on your home, or do you just pray? And they would probably say, well, no, I have insurance on my home. Well, why? Why don't you just pray? Do I have health insurance? Yes. Well, is that a lack of faith? Why don't you just pray and ask God to keep you healthy? It's the same way, I think, with a handgun. It's not a question, I don't think, of morality. Is it moral to own a gun or have a gun in the home? It's more of a prudential question. Now, another person might say, I don't want to go down that road. I've lived without a gun for 40 years. I've never had a need for it. I've never had that in my mind. I've never even considered it. And I think if I were to get a gun, one might say it would make me paranoid. Every little sound now, I might think that I might have to use the gun. Every little sound, it's a break-in. Oh, somebody's after me. Somebody's going to attack. So it might make you paranoid. It might mess with your mind, your mentality. It might change. It might even rob you of peace. So that's a consideration. And then another consideration, if you have a gun, you should probably learn how to use a gun. So that would involve classes. You would have to go to a gun range. You would have to get an instructor and join a group and learn how to shoot the gun, because one of the rules is if you have a gun, you better know how to use it. Because you can hurt yourself, you can hurt family members. If you have a gun in the home and you have ammunition in the home, there is a danger with that, just having the gun. And then you have to decide, well, am I going to keep my gun in my room at night, in the drawer? Is it going to be loaded? Is it going to have ammunition next to it? Would I have to load it at night during a break-in? There are all these practical questions. Then you'd have to spend money. If you don't have a gun, then you're asking, well, do I want to go out and spend the money? You're probably talking, even to get a low-end gun, you're probably going to have to spend at least a couple $100s. And then with ammunition, you're talking hundreds of dollars to just own it. Do you want to spend that money? Do you want to invest in that, which maybe will never be used? So there are all kinds of questions that it raises. If you have a gun, is it safe? If you have little children around, is it safe in your home? Well, you can keep it in a gun case. Okay, are you going to be willing to invest in an expensive gun case or some kind of a safe? So if you keep it in the safe, is it easy to get it out if there's a criminal breaking in your home? But if it's locked away, is that going to give the criminal time to break in? And is it going to cause a lot of problems for you trying to get that gun out of the safe? So it's good to have it in a safe place, but is it practical in getting it into your hand when you might need it? So there are all kinds of considerations that you have to consider when you're deciding whether you should get a gun. But I don't think that there's anything in the Bible that would say, no, you shouldn't have a gun for self-defense. I don't think once you've concluded that pacifism is not a rational biblical position, and that, yeah, there are instances where violence is necessary for a good cause, such as defending your family against a criminal or a rapist or murderer. Once you've decided that it is okay to do violence in some situations, then I think owning a gun is more of a practical consideration. Do I need this? Do I actually want this? If I didn't ever own a gun in the home, or didn't, another consideration, you have to license that gun. You have to register that gun. And I'm not quite sure all of the laws of all of the different states, but it might be you have to license that on a certain cycle. So, and you have to keep the gun clean. You have to clean it, because if you don't clean the gun and keep it functional at the time you might need it, it might jam, misfire, all kinds of things. So it opens up a whole can of worms of responsibilities if you own a gun. And then you have to decide, are you willing to actually fire that gun at someone rather than just scare them off, or fire in the air to scare them off? Are you willing to actually fire at someone? And then the question is, okay, you've introduced a gun into the situation. So what if they don't back off and they start firing at you? Are you willing to have a gunfight with someone? All of these are important questions, and I think each person has to look at them and ask for God's wisdom, as it's recorded in the book of James. And God will give you wisdom as to whether you should or shouldn't own a gun in your home. Hope that's been helpful, and we will talk to you next week on another program. God bless.